In the early 1800s, an English teenager left Europe behind and traveled up the Mississippi River to what was then the small town of St. Louis. There, he achieved the American dream, made a fortune, built mansions, and planted the grandest garden the frontier had ever seen. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. In 1800, Henry Shaw was born in the steelmaking center of Sheffield, England. As a young man, he received a gentleman's education but left school when his father's iron business fell on hard times. Eager to restore the family fortune, 18-year-old Shaw set off across the Atlantic in 1818 to seek new markets for Sheffield steel. In the spring of 1819, he arrived in the United States and headed up the Mississippi River, eventually landing in a small French-founded village called St. Louis. The St. Louis of 1819 was no metropolis. It was a modest town about 3 blocks deep along the riverbank, a frontier outpost only a few decades old. He set up a humble hardware shop on Main Street, selling high-quality Sheffield cutlery, tools, and metal goods to local residents and pioneers heading west. Profits from the hardware trade enabled him to branch out into other ventures as St. Louis grew. He reinvested in agricultural commodities, mining, real estate, and even the fur trade, riding the wave of the city's rapid expansion. By steadily buying parcels of land on the outskirts of town, Shaw amassed roughly 1,000 acres of St. Louis property by the 1840s. He had arrived an outsider as a teenager, but by age 40, Henry Shaw had parlayed his hard work into a substantial fortune. In 1840, remarkably early by any standard, Shaw retired from active commerce, one of the largest landholders in the city, and financially set for life. This newfound freedom allowed him to pursue a very different passion that had been quietly growing in him, a love of botany and gardens. The 1840s became a decade of discovery for the wealthy ex-merchant. Shaw traveled extensively through the United States and Europe, indulging his curiosity for plants, gardens, and culture. He was particularly inspired by visits to the grand estates and botanical gardens of Europe, places like the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew in London and the lush grounds of Chatsworth House in England. These experiences planted the seed of an idea. Shaw began to envision creating a similar oasis of horticulture back home in St. Louis, a public garden that would educate and delight like the great European gardens. By 1851, after visiting London's Great Exhibition and touring Continental Gardens, Shaw returned to Missouri, firmly committed to his dream. He had the land, the wealth, and the will to make it happen. All he needed was a home on his property from which to oversee his botanical ambitions, and perhaps a refined residence in the city as well to suit his stature. Backing up a bit, in the late 1840s, Henry Shaw commissioned noted local architect George I. Barnett to design a prestigious townhouse for him in downtown St. Louis. Completed in 1850, this tall, 3-story residence was built of brick and stone, a design inspired by Italian Renaissance palazzos and adapted to modern Victorian taste. The facade featured a distinctive, arcaded loggia with decorative curved arches stretching across the front. Behind its wrought iron fence and arched openings, Shaw's townhouse contained 17 rooms and was outfitted to be comfortable but not ostentatious. In fact, for all his wealth, Shaw's city mansion was relatively modest compared to the enormous Gilded Age palaces that would soon sprout in the city. It reflected a practical, refined style rather than lavish excess. The interior boasted high ceilings and handsome woodwork, but Shaw never enlarged it into a showplace. Instead, he kept his dignified townhome as a convenient winter house in the city, while focusing much of his attention on his country estate where his botanical interest bloomed. Simultaneously, in 1849, Shaw began constructing his country home on the open land he owned just outside the city. Also designed by George I. Barnett, this house was done in an Italianate style, making it one of the earliest Italianate villas in St. Louis. Shaw named it Tower Grove House, a poetic nod to the property's grove of sassafras trees and the prominent central tower that rose from the villa's roofline. The architecture was inspired by Italian Renaissance villas, a rectangular 2-story form with a low-pitched roof and overhanging eaves, but adapted by Barnett to include that unique 3-story tower, adding a bird's-eye view over Shaw's vast grounds. Built of brick and stone and covered in pale stucco, Tower Grove House exuded old-world charm transplanted to the Midwestern prairie. Inside, though more intimate in scale than the city townhouse, the villa was appointed in the Victorian fashion. The western wing of the home comprised Shaw's personal domain, high-ceilinged rooms such as a parlor, formal dining room, informal breakfast room, and a couple of bedrooms, all trimmed with marble fireplaces and hand-carved woodwork, hallmarks of mid-19th century craftsmanship. By the mid-1850s, Henry Shaw had firmly shifted from commerce to cultivating his grand garden vision. On the extensive grounds surrounding Tower Grove House, he methodically planned out botanical displays inspired by the formal gardens he had seen abroad. With guidance from prominent botanists, including Dr. George Engelmann of St. Louis and Sir William Hooker of Kew Gardens, Shaw expanded his estate into a living museum of plants. In 1859, he took the unexpected step of opening his beloved garden to the public, creating the Missouri Botanical Garden, one of the first of its kind in the United States. Locals affectionately called it Shaw's Garden, and it soon became a St. Louis treasure. Shaw's philanthropic streak did not stop at the garden gates. In 1867, he donated a large tract of adjacent land for what would become Tower Grove Park, a Victorian walking park for the people of St. Louis. He personally oversaw the layout of this park as well, adding whimsical pavilions and statuary to delight visitors. Over the years, Shaw also gave generously to fund a school of botany at Washington University and helped establish the Missouri Historical Society, among other civic contributions. It's fair to say that by his later years, Henry Shaw had transformed from a profit-driven merchant into one of Missouri's greatest 19th century benefactors and lovers of nature. Despite his public achievements, Shaw's personal life was relatively quiet. He never married and had no children, choosing instead to pour his time and resources into the institutions he founded. In 1889, at the venerable age of 89, Henry Shaw passed away in the comfort of Tower Grove House. Fittingly, he chose to remain in his garden forever. Shaw was laid to rest in a mausoleum he had built just a few steps from Tower Grove House, amid a shady grove of oak and sassafras trees. With his passing, Shaw's detailed will went into effect, ensuring that the Missouri Botanical Garden would continue for the enjoyment of the public as a charitable trust. He even included an odd but telling final wish, that his downtown townhouse be dismantled and rebuilt on the garden property. The probate judge at first deemed the request burdensome and costly, but the instructions stood. By 1891, within 2 years of Shaw's passing, workers carefully dismantled the townhouse and rebuilt it at 2315 Tower Grove Avenue, just inside the garden's perimeter. The relocated mansion was positioned not far from Tower Grove House, reunifying Shaw's residences on his beloved property. In the process of reassembly, the house received some modifications. For instance, an extension of the arch loggia wing with additional bays was added to the south side, complete with a matching pavilion to better suit its new site. Meanwhile, Tower Grove House remained at the heart of the Missouri Botanical Garden, adapting to over a century of change. After Shaw's passing, the country villa became the residence of the garden's first director and his family. Since then, the mansion has undergone extensive restorations and has even been updated with modern conveniences including electricity. From the bustling city blocks of downtown to the serene gardens of Tower Grove, Henry Shaw's mansions have survived against the odds. Both the townhouse and Tower Grove House are still standing today, preserved, repurposed, and celebrated as part of St. Louis's rich architectural and historical heritage. And in even rarer form, the gardens survive to this day as well, serving as both the Missouri Botanical Garden and Tower Grove Park. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Which did you like more, the house or the gardens? Let me know down below in the comments section. My goal for this year is to reach 1 million subscribers, so if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and let's reach this goal together. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time on This House.